In every courtroom drama, there's usually money, property, or reputation at stake. But in this story, the battle wasn't over a mansion, a business empire, or millions of dollars. It was over a dog. Yes, the family pet. Once the source of love and companionship, became the center of one of the most emotionally charged legal wars the courtroom had ever seen. And if you think it's just a dog, you might be underestimating how powerful loyalty, love, and loss can be when families break apart. Before we dive deep into the case, make sure to subscribe to our channel because every day we bring you stories that reveal the raw, unfiltered realities of human conflict, stories you won't want to miss. It began with the divorce. At first, the arguments focused on custody of the children, the division of assets, and the financial settlements. But then, quietly, almost unexpectedly, came the battle over the family dog. To one side, the dog was more than a pet. It was a source of emotional stability, a companion during lonely nights, a protector during vulnerable moments. To the other side, the dog was a symbol of loyalty that they refused to lose to someone they felt had already taken too much. What started as a disagreement soon escalated into one of the most unusual legal battles ever documented. Lawyers argued passionately about who had cared for the dog more. One side presented photos of late-night walks, vet bills, and receipts for food and toys. The other side countered with stories of bonding, companionship, and promises made when the dog was first brought home. Witnesses were called. Friends, neighbors, even the veterinarian testified about who the dog seemed most attached to. The courtroom listened to emotional testimonies, some with tears, others with anger. It was no longer about logic, it was about love. The judge, who had likely presided over hundreds of cases involving money and property, now faced a decision far more complex than numbers and contracts. This wasn't about bank accounts, it was about a living being, a dog that couldn't speak for itself, but whose presence meant everything to the family. As the hearings dragged on, the tension in the courtroom became unbearable. People whispered that this wasn't just a custody battle, it was a war of pride, grief, and unresolved wounds. And at the center of it all was a dog, sitting silently in the middle of a storm it never chose. But then something unexpected happened, something that changed the entire direction of the case. It wasn't evidence, it wasn't a lawyer's argument, and it wasn't a legal technicality. It was something far simpler and far more powerful. And when it happened, the entire courtroom was stunned into silence, realizing that this was no longer just a fight over a pet. It was a fight over something much deeper. The courtroom sat in silence as the unexpected moment unfolded. The family dog, who had been quietly present during parts of the proceedings, was brought into the room. Until that moment, the debate had been all words, documents, and arguments. But suddenly, the truth didn't need to be spoken. It revealed itself. The dog, upon being released from the leash, didn't hesitate for even a second. It ran straight toward one person, tail wagging, eyes full of recognition and joy. Gasps filled the courtroom. For months, the lawyers had argued about who loved the dog more, but in that instant, the dog made its choice known. This was more than a symbolic gesture. It was a turning point. One side argued that the dog's reaction proved who it was most bonded with. The other side insisted it was just a matter of habit, not evidence of true care. But the judge, witnesses, and even the jury could not ignore the raw honesty of that moment. It was the kind of truth no legal brief or testimony could deny. It struck at the heart of everyone watching, because animals, unlike people, don't lie. Yet, instead of resolving the case, the moment intensified the conflict. The side that didn't receive the dog's affection grew furious. To them, this wasn't just about losing a pet, it was about losing dignity, about being humiliated in front of strangers, about watching loyalty slip through their fingers. The courtroom, once tense, now felt like a battleground. Tears flowed freely, voices rose louder, and the judge struggled to maintain order. The lawyers doubled down, each side more determined than ever. One attorney argued that emotional bonds should outweigh legal ownership. Another countered that the law recognizes pets as property, not people, and property is divided by contracts, not feelings. It was a heartbreaking reality, trying to fit something as deep as love for an animal into the rigid boxes of legal definitions. Outside the courthouse, the case drew media attention. Reporters covered it as the custody battle over a dog. But for those inside, it was never just a story for headlines. It was real. The dog wasn't just property, it was family. And while the world watched with fascination, those inside the courtroom lived with pain. Days stretched into weeks. Evidence mounted, witnesses kept coming forward, and the judge's patience wore thin. The dog's presence in the courtroom that day had exposed more than affection. It exposed the wounds of a broken family. It revealed the truth that this fight wasn't about money, houses, or even the dog alone. It was about power, control, and who would walk away feeling like they had won. But soon, a new layer of the case would be uncovered, something that neither side had expected. It wasn't about emotion, and it wasn't about law. It was about the past. And once it came out, the battle would shift in a way no one could have predicted. The courtroom buzzed with whispers after the shocking testimonies. Everyone thought they had heard the worst of it, until a witness was called who no one had expected. A close family friend stepped onto the stand, carrying documents that seemed to shake even the attorneys. These weren't just papers about ownership or veterinary bills, they were letters, private correspondences, and records that told a story no one had anticipated. According to the evidence, the dog had not even been purchased in the straightforward way both sides claimed. It had been a gift, an unexpected, heartfelt gesture meant to heal wounds during one of the most difficult times in the family's history. This gift had been made not to one person, but to both, as a symbol of unity. The courtroom sat stunned. If the dog had always been a symbol of their bond, then who truly had the right to claim it once that bond was broken? Gasps echoed through the room as more details emerged. The letters revealed that the dog had been chosen specifically because it had come from a shelter where it had once been abandoned. It was meant to represent a fresh start, a reminder that no matter how broken the past felt, loyalty and love could rebuild trust. And now, here they were, fighting bitterly over the very creature that had once symbolized hope. The judge leaned forward, visibly moved but also troubled. He questioned both sides about these revelations, asking whether they had forgotten why the dog had been brought into their lives in the first place. The answers were muddled with anger and sorrow. One side argued that the dog chose them, and that loyalty couldn't be forced. The other side claimed that bonds couldn't be erased just because circumstances had changed. As emotions escalated, the dog sat quietly in the corner, unaware of the chaos its presence had caused. And in that silence, the jury seemed to realize something profound. This was not only a battle over a pet, it was a mirror reflecting the collapse of a family. The dog wasn't just an animal in the middle of a dispute. It was the embodiment of trust, forgiveness, and shared history, now being torn apart in front of everyone. Then came the turning point no one saw coming. The witness revealed one more detail. There was a clause in the shelter's adoption papers that neither side had remembered. If disputes arose about the animal's welfare, the shelter retained the right to reclaim the dog to ensure it lived in peace. Suddenly, the possibility of neither side keeping the dog loomed large. A wave of panic rippled through the courtroom. Both parties had fought so hard to win, but in their fight, they risked losing the very thing they were battling for. The tension became unbearable. Every word, every accusation, every tear now seemed heavier, because the ultimate outcome might not favor either side. And as the judge called for a recess, the air was thick with dread. The war over loyalty, love, and memory had reached a point where the cost might be greater than anyone was prepared to pay. But the most dramatic decision was still waiting to be made, the one that would not only determine the dog's fate, but also leave every person in that courtroom forever changed. When the court resumed after recess, the silence was deafening. Both sides returned, visibly shaken by the possibility that the shelter might reclaim the dog entirely. The attorneys whispered urgently with their clients, the tension written across every face. The jury shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of what was about to happen. The judge cleared his throat and addressed the courtroom. He reminded everyone that while emotions were high, the law was clear. The dog's welfare had to come first. This wasn't about punishment or pride or even past promises. It was about ensuring the animal lived in an environment of love and stability, free from hostility. Those words cut through the air like a blade, reminding everyone what had been lost in the bitterness of the fight. And then, in an unexpected twist, the judge ordered both parties to step forward. He asked them one final question. Could they, for once, put aside their resentment and agree on what was truly best for the dog? It wasn't about who won, but about whether they could still protect what they once cared for together. The courtroom held its breath. Tears filled the eyes of one of the parties as they spoke first. Their voice cracked, confessing that the battle had consumed them so deeply they had forgotten why the dog mattered in the first place. The other side, moved and shaken, admitted the same. For the first time during the entire trial, the two shared a glance, not of anger, but of recognition. In that moment, they weren't rivals. They were simply two people who had once loved the same family, the same home, and the same loyal companion. The judge paused, weighing their sincerity. Finally, he ruled that the dog would remain with one party, but only under strict conditions that guaranteed the other could still share time and be present in its life. It wasn't about ownership anymore, it was about responsibility. The shelter clause wouldn't be invoked. The dog would not be taken away. Instead, the court gave them one last chance to remember what unity meant, even in separation. When the gavel fell, the case was closed. But what lingered in that room was more powerful than the verdict. The jury left, knowing they had witnessed more than a legal dispute. They had seen a lesson about love, pride, and what happens when we let anger blind us to what really matters. As the family dog wagged its tail, oblivious to the storm it had just weathered, everyone realized the truth. Sometimes, the fiercest battles are not about victory, but about learning to let go of resentment. And sometimes, the most powerful resolution comes not in proving who was right, but in remembering why you cared at all. Thank you for watching. If you found this story moving, make sure to subscribe to our channel for daily videos just like this. Every day, we bring you stories that open your heart, challenge your perspective, and leave you with something to think about. Don't forget, true loyalty is never about possession, but about love. And sometimes, the best way to win is by choosing peace.